Good morning, everyone. My name is Caitlin Yeager, Director of Heritage Programs for Missouri Humanities. Our mission is to enrich lives and strengthen communities by connecting Missourians with the people, places, and ideas that shape our society. Thank you so much for joining us today for part one of Total Town Makeover, a two-part series that addresses the issues of why some towns thrive, while others decline, and what influences people to live and work in some communities, but not in others. Our hope is that the information from this series gives you some pointers on how you can help your community make a turnaround for the better. More specifically, part one today will detail 3 essentials for a total town makeover. How does your community stack up, and how can you help initiate positive change? Whether you're joining us on Zoom or watching on Facebook Live, of course, we invite you to be part of the conversation. If you're on Facebook, feel free to comment to let us know you're watching or to ask questions for us to consider. And if you're on Zoom, we are going to take questions in 2 different ways. You can either use the chat feature or the Q&A feature on Zoom, and we'll try to answer as many questions as possible towards the end of our time today. If you enjoyed our program and are interested in seeing more from Missouri Humanities, please check us out on Facebook or on our website for the most up-to-date information about our events. We also have a membership program where benefits include free books, discounted tickets to special programs, and access to members-only events. To become a member, visit mohumanities.org and click memberships under the About Us tab. Now, I'm very excited to introduce our speaker for this series, Andrew Mccray. Andrew draws upon a wealth of experiences when he is crisscrossing the country to deliver his messages. As a farmer and rancher from Northwest Missouri, Andrew knows what it is like to move herds of cattle and work 18-hour days harvesting a crop. His daily radio program, The American Countryside, has won 5 Oscars in agriculture. In addition, he also produces broadcasts heard nationally on the Westwood One radio network. He truly cares about making a difference in the lives of those he meets. He's chairman of the Heartland Foundation, a leadership foundation empowering youth and adults in Missouri, Kansas, Nebraska, and Iowa. He also serves as a certified lay pastor and vice chairman of the Missouri Beef Industry Council. And one little plug for Andrew, he has written a wonderful book that a lot of this information comes from, Total Town Makeover. So I highly recommend this, and I'm sure Andrew would love to give you guys information on how to purchase this later on. So from boardrooms to classrooms, from Alaska to Florida, speaking to groups from 10 to 10,000, Andrew has brought his message to thousands. So I am very pleased to introduce Andrew Mcrae. Andrew?
Thank you, Caitlin. Good to be with you and everyone else this morning, wherever you may be joining us from. So there are perhaps some online that have heard me speak before on some of these topics, and perhaps you never have. So for some of you, you may be hearing a little bit new, and some of it will be all new. As Caitlin mentioned, we're going to be talking in 2 different parts. And this part is really focused on these 3 successful keys for communities. Now, in the second part next week, we'll really get into more of how you can begin to fund some of these ideas and how you begin to put the leadership together to make some of those things happen, so you have an idea. As Caitlin mentioned, let me give you just a little added background of how and why I have what I have in the presentation this morning. So I'm a farmer in Northwest Missouri and went back home after I graduated from Mizzou with an agriculture degree, and am still on the farm, but also got involved in broadcasting, at first in radio, and then today actually work with Farm Journal Broadcasting, where I do a daily syndicated radio feature called American Countryside, and also do that now for television, do it for print for some of their publications, and then do podcasts and online broadcasting for them as well. I was traveling, and in fact do travel for all of the American Countryside broadcasts. I do them all on location. And I'm most often just sharing interesting stories about people and places. Often they're good stories, maybe people you've never heard of. I often say with a story you'll never forget. Well, what was happening is I was inadvertently gathering a lot of stories about these people and places that were doing great things. And people began to ask me, well, how did that town do that? Or what did they do? And suddenly the light bulb went off, and I thought, wow, I have collected several of these stories that we could use. And I began to examine, well, what are some of these communities doing well? What are they doing right? And what could we learn from them? And so I'm actually involved in my own community as well in Northwest Missouri. And sometimes we're successful and sometimes not so successful. But I do have a personal interest and background in this because it affects my own community of under 1,000 people. But I also enjoy sharing these stories with others from the broadcast side. So Let's jump into this, and I will be presenting, but feel free to ask questions. We'll probably take most of those toward the end, but we'll certainly have time for questions. Here's where I begin. So I mentioned I'm on the farm, and one gentleman we've done business with over time is a guy named Jackie Moore, lives in Joplin, Missouri. He has the Joplin Regional Stockyards, and so we still round up cattle by horseback, and we were looking for a horse at one time, and Jackie knew that, and Jackie said, why don't you and your dad come down, and I've got a horse I think is going to work perfect for you. So that's what my dad and I came down to Joplin. We went back into the sale barn. Jackie said, oh, you're going to love this horse. And Jackie, if you know Jackie enjoys really giving you the very positive side of a story. Now, that doesn't mean that he's lying. He just focuses on the positive. Nothing wrong with that. But he was building up this horse and just said, oh, this horse is great. He can work all day long. He can do anything that any other horse can, and just bragged him up. And finally, we get back to the pen to see the horse. And it was just a little horse. He wasn't very impressive. He didn't look all that muscular. There were a lot bigger horses around. And Dad and I'd heard Jackie give us this big spiel about this horse and really questioned whether this was the case. And finally, Jackie gets done with all this. And my dad said, Jackie, that horse is too little to do all of that stuff that you're talking about. And Jackie just smiled and said, that horse doesn't know he's little. And he was true. That horse didn't know he was little. He did a lot, and we ended up buying him. He was a great horse. But I share this because what was true for the horse is very true for communities. And I hear it time and time again when I go to different towns. And in fact, I was on a board here a couple of years ago in my hometown. And we were talking about this idea, and somebody said, well, we can't do that because that town's a lot bigger than us. And I'm here to tell you that the stories I'm about to present are towns and people that don't know they're little. And I don't know what a little town is. Maybe that's 100 people, maybe it's 1,000 people, maybe it's 10,000 people. The size doesn't matter, it's the mindset. And I'm not here just to tell you that you think happy thoughts and great things happen, no. But I am here to tell you that a lot of this is how you want to look at yourself. And if you decide to say, we're a little horse and we can't do it, you won't do it. If you decide to say, I don't know that we're a little horse, you're probably going to accomplish a lot of great things. So, it comes down to a couple of questions, why versus why not. And why is an important question to ask because it reflects on why certain things have happened. Why have we lost population? Why have we lost businesses? Why have those things happened? Important question to ask. However, if you're stuck on why is a question that usually looks backwards. It's past. And so you have to ask just as many why nots. Why not? What if? How can? Those type of questions begin to move you forward. And so as you begin this process, I would encourage you to, certainly you're going to ask why, but you've got to begin to ask the why nots. What if, how can these things begin to happen? I'm not going to bore you with a lot of data, but I do want to show you a couple things. And I know the folks in Maryville, Missouri that aren't too far from me, and they share this as well. We know that little towns, small towns, whatever that means to you, have perhaps lost population in a lot of places. But even a town that I would consider thriving, Maryville, over 10,000 people, has Northwest Missouri State there. They're going to experience 3% population growth, but yet they're expected to lose $100 million of business by the year 2030 due to population drain from adjacent communities. So it's really an issue that faces all of us, because no matter the size of your town, whenever we have communities around us or counties around us that may not be thriving, it affects all of us. And I think we would all agree, we want to have homes and communities and jobs where people can thrive, families can flourish, and people want to be. So how do we make that happen? Well, a couple of quick quotes I want to share with you, and then we'll jump into what are these three factors. One is this, and I think about this often: change is disturbing when it's done to us. Change is exhilarating when it's done by us. And for many of us in our communities, we felt disturbing change because things have happened and we wonder, well, why did people leave? Why did this happen? Why did this business leave, and so forth? And that doesn't feel good. But yet, have you ever been a part of a group in which you were creating change and people got excited about that? And so that's what you have to do, is to find exhilarating change, but bring people in to be a part of that. So everyone, in a sense, feels that they are a part of that exhilarating change. When we feel like we're a part of the change, we get excited about that. And that's critical. And we'll talk more about that in the second section next week when we talk about leadership and making these ideas happen. Secondly, is a quote from Franklin Roosevelt in the middle of the Depression, who said, do something. If it works, do more of it. If it doesn't, do something else. And I see a lot of communities that try something and maybe it doesn't work and then sit still. And the idea is do something. If it works, do more of it. If it doesn't, do something else. But do something, keep moving, try to make little differences. And I will make that a key this morning is even little things build momentum to make great things happen. So while there are a lot of different things that communities can do, I have found in my travels over the last 25 years doing these broadcasts that there seem to be three things that pop up time and time again with successful communities. And so those three are that there's economic vitality, they are vibrant communities, so places that people want to live and work and have a family. And then they tend to invest in youth. And I will tell you, as I share these examples, it's really hard to separate one from another. So in other words, often if you're doing something for the economy, that also makes your community more vibrant and it may be helping youth. So it's not like that you have these examples and they are in a silo and they don't affect the other things. They often cross over, but as best I can, I will give you some examples from each one of these areas of what I see communities doing. So let's take economic vitality first, because certainly if people are going to live in a place, they have to earn a living somehow. Now, that doesn't mean that they can't commute a little ways, and that's fine. We are part of a bigger community, perhaps a region, but there has to be a way to earn money. So there are two key things that I would ask you to keep in mind. What makes your community uniquely special? And take extra notice of that word uniquely. We're going to get to that in a moment because I think that's really key in the communities I see. What makes your community uniquely special? And secondly, what do people routinely go somewhere else to purchase or find? Now, that second question can have a direct impact on the economy. So if there's business that you're losing that's going to another area, can a person begin to begin a business, or can they with somehow grassroots support begin that? Now, I will give you some examples of businesses that began where the community necessarily wasn't that they were leaving to purchase this, but they found a niche and people wanted to come there to either purchase or be a part of that. And so we'll talk about that. But these are two key questions I find with economic vitality. What makes your community uniquely special? What do people routinely go somewhere else to find or purchase? So I don't want to get too hung up on the uniquely special, because you'll begin to think, oh, well, that doesn't really drive the economy. Let me give you a perfect example of this. So I feel like I have, in a sense, two small town hometowns. I live in the King City School District, yet I have a Maysville, Missouri address. Both towns are about 1,000 people. In King City, Missouri, there's something called the Big Pump. And the Big Pump dates back to the 1940s, was a gas pump. And they built it as the Big Pump because they wanted to attract people there to buy gas. And so if you Google the Big Pump on the internet, you'll find loads and loads of pictures and lots of people that have come to the Big Pump. Now, to the credit of King City and the museum there, they've restored the Big Pump and people come by and take pictures. I will tell you that of anything in King City, the Big Pump is the thing that would attract people there. However, for the people in King City, they'd probably say, well, yeah, that's kind of neat, but it's just sitting there in the museum grounds, big deal. And you might be tempted to say, well, the Big Pump, yeah, that doesn't really, drive business. That's not earning us any money. And here's where I think you have to be careful. And this is a video where I'm about to have Caitlin show you about this intersection of what makes you uniquely special, the economy, and vibrant communities. And they begin to all coincide and really create something unique to happen. And I will tell you that the Big Pump is really an untapped resource we have in town. We could probably do more with that and attract more people, not just to see a Big Pump, but begin to drive some business off of that. So I'm going to have Caitlin show a video, and this is from Casey, Illinois. And to set this video up, Jim Boland is just a guy that owns a business in town. It's actually a pipeline company, but he really cared about his small town. And he began to say, well, what can we do to perhaps help attract people there and help build business? And so what happened is a really unique story. This is a piece we shot for our TV version of American Countryside. It takes about 2.5 minutes, but I'm going to have Caitlin show that, and then we'll discuss about how these communities make this happen. So Caitlin, go ahead, and if you want to share the video.
Mm-hmm. So I have a few around home, and
was the same, facing many smaller. When Jim Boland looked around his hometown of Casey, Illinois a few years ago, he says the impression he got was the same facing many smaller communities.
I mean, you've seen things deteriorating in our town.
The Bolands took a family vacation to Colorado and were inspired by some of the unique shops they found in one small town. Jim's wife and daughter loved what they saw and said they should open a similar shop back home in Casey. Jim warmed up to the idea, but he had an important condition.
Let's think outside the box. Let's try to do something that would bring more people to town to help our neighbors instead of hurt them or compete with them.
So what could they do that would be unique and not compete with anything else in the area? Jim had an interesting inspiration.
I have wind chimes at home because my grandmother Whitlingham has always reminded me of her. So I have a few around home, and I was listening to my wind chimes one windy evening.
And that led Jim to look up what the largest wind chimes were in the world. He found the answer and thought he could beat it. After all, he operated a pipeline company and had plenty of access to pipe, and wind chimes are mostly just pipes. He got to work.
We got the wind chimes in the Guinness Book of 2011 in October.
And the family opened a shop next door to the world's largest wind chimes. They noticed people stopping to look, not just residents, but people from out of town. So there was only one thing to do: keep building.
The next thing was a golf tee. One of the guys that worked for us was the president of the golf club at that time. He said, "Can you think of an idea that we can do to help spur the golf club, because it's a small course."
The world's largest golf tee was soon constructed on the golf course. Jim says there was a lot of materials around town if you just had a creative mind to build with them. He had plenty of old pipe, tanks, and other metal from their business. Then he found a local utility company that let him have used poles, perfect for a golf tee, and much more, including a record holder that stands over 56 feet tall.
The rocking chair is made out of the used telephone poles and pipeline material, but inside the rockers is a steel skeleton, and it's not tied down, it's just sitting there. Yes, it rocks. It has to rock to get in the Guinness Book, so it has to physically work.
It is the world's largest rocking chair. It's just across the street from the world's largest wind chimes and the world's largest teeter-totter. And of course, those three are just a couple of blocks down the street from the world's largest mailbox. The town is home to over a dozen world's largest items, plus many more oversized pieces. It's hard to know exactly how many visitors are stopping in this town of 3,000, and Jim estimates an additional 1,500 per week since they began building.
One of the ways I tell people the town's changed is it's give people a sense of pride in their hometown again.
And not only do the citizens have pride in their town and more people are stopping to shop, there's a change on the streets as well.
A lot of folks are starting to fix up businesses uptown, opening new businesses. It gives them a reason to try to rejuvenate the downtown.
Every town will have street signs, but only here will you find the street signs pointing to the largest items in the world. Traveling the countryside in Casey, Illinois, I'm Andrew Mccray.
All right, thank you, Caitlin. And she's going to switch back here in a moment. We'll be back over to the slides. But so Casey, Illinois, and I will tell you, and I'll flash this up at the very end as well. Let's see here. I'm going to share my screen again. So you've got that. And I think we're about ready here. There we go. So we should be back to the share screen there. I think everybody should be on the big pump. So if you go to totaltownmakeover.com, we have those videos there. So including that one. So if you'd like to look at it again in just a little bit, you can see it there. So here's why I'm keen off of what makes your community uniquely special. In Casey, Illinois, I guess they, in a sense, created their uniquely special. But people want to have something that makes their town unique. And I'm not saying that you have to go and do something trivial, but there are often things there that are often overlooked. And those things not only make us feel good about where we live, but they give us pride, and then they begin to spur economic activity. So what began to happen in Casey was, as Jim mentioned, they began to have businesses open. So he did his in conjunction with what he's doing. He opened a business, but then those storefronts began to open. And I've seen this time and time again where this begins to happen. What happens many times with our towns is this: we look to lure a business to town, and there's nothing wrong with that. Depending on the size of your town, that may be more or less realistic. And we may have some economic developers on here, and nothing wrong with that whatsoever. But you'll find at the end of my presentation that I will talk more about this. We often overlook the potential businesses in our town, or the businesses that we can begin to develop with the people already there. And those businesses are most likely to stay because they are residents of that community. And so those are great places to begin. So this economic vitality, and how do some places make it happen? Lucas, Kansas, I'm going to show you the slide in a moment, but I'm going to hold it because the picture itself is a little funny. They knew that they had some businesses that were interested in the arts. And so that might be actual paintings, but it also could be other creations they made just from local artistry. And so people began to come to some of those stores. So they began to find, okay, we have a synergy around a certain topic, in this case, the arts in this little town of Lucas, Kansas. They began to say, okay, not only are we artistic, but what could we do that makes us uniquely special to help promote this town and promote these businesses? Well, to make a long story short, they began to have people in town that were coming, and if they stayed for a while, they needed to use the bathroom. They needed a restroom. So they needed a public toilet. Now, in Lucas, Kansas, you will find a public toilet. Here's what they created. And I don't know who voted on this, but it's voted the second best public toilet in the world. And that's their public toilet. And if you look at it, you can tell that they made not only this bathroom, but it's supposed to look like a toilet. So notice the mosaic around the door is supposed to be the lid that's tilted up. And then there you can see the bowl. And then that little mosaic in the center there, you look in that, and that's like items that fell in the toilet bowl. And they made this mosaic. They got funding from, I don't know, the National Academy for the Arts, different things that helped fund the public restroom in Lucas, Kansas. I know some of you are asking, where is the #1 public toilet? And I think they told me it was in Germany. It's not in the US. So they have the best public toilet in the United States. Now, most people would not say having the best public toilet in the United States is what's going to spur economic activity. I'm here to tell you in Lucas, Kansas, it does, because it is just another reason for people to come to town. It dovetails into the arts. They've created a unique place. They've made an artistic place, but the shops lining this little town are mostly dealing with the arts, but there are other successful business there. There's a very successful meat market. The meat market is successful because people are coming to the town for the arts. And so this is how this thing begins to happen. Let me give you another example of uniquely special and how it drives economic activity. Red Cloud, Nebraska, home to Willa Cather, who was a Pulitzer Prize winning author from 100 years ago, which is great, but most people would say, okay, I don't know if I've heard that name. Maybe you have, maybe you haven't. But they said, this is something special. Not many towns can say they have. And so they renovated their opera house. And their opera house, once again, got some grants to help do that, also worked in conjunction with some grants for the arts. And now they will put on plays, theater, some of them based off of Willa Cather's works, but other theater and arts. And so this began to generate people coming to town because they could be a part of the theater. They could see some of these plays, connect with this author, this writing connection. Families began to invest in the community. Businesses began to spring up next to the theater because people were coming there. So again, we may say, oh, little thing, but there's so many towns that never take this step to connect. In this case, to something in the past, but they made it very much a part of their present in the future. One more, and we have a video of this, but we're not going to show it today for sake of time. But if you do go to the Total Town Makeover webpage, you will find the video we did about Hamilton. Of course, this is in Missouri, so some of you may be familiar with this story, but J.C. Penney, his hometown is Hamilton, Missouri. So that was a bit of a draw, and they've certainly connected to that. But then they had a family that began quilting. And so Hamilton is, by some people's accounts, known as the Disneyland of quilting. They have, I think on last count, about 12 quilt stores. They have tourist buses coming just for quilting. Year round, it is a big deal about quilting in Hamilton, Missouri. Now, if you go back to the questions I asked and said, what makes your community uniquely special? What are people going somewhere else to purchase? Well, I told you not to get too hung up on the go somewhere else to purchase. People weren't having to drive somewhere else necessarily to get quilts. And you may not think, well, everybody's got to have a quilt. But they did find something that made them uniquely special. And they began to put businesses together, much like Lucas, Kansas did about the arts. And so the quilts were the thing that began to draw people to Hamilton. Now, I will tell you again, because that spurred economic activity, they now have some new restaurants, some very fine dining in Hamilton. They now have a state-of-the-art butterfly garden that they've built. they've begun to do other things in that community. They have a new museum to go along with the Penny Museum. Hamilton, Missouri, very successful small town, because they began to think, what makes us uniquely special and how can that drive economic activity? So again, we get focused on how can we lure a business here, and there's nothing wrong with that. But many of these towns have discovered these two things: what makes us uniquely special and how can we do that to drive economic activity. Some amazing things can begin to happen. Now that leads us into these vibrant communities, and you're already telling that because we've done some things on the economic side, it's already creating a vibrant community. Red Cloud, Nebraska now has a theater. They have different plays and things that are a part, I think, of a vibrant community. There are things that are amenities that people might want to have wherever they live. And so it's really hard to separate the two. They're part and parcel together. But let's look at what some people have done. One of my favorite stories about creating a vibrant community and how one person can make that happen is the story of the Ketterlings. Now, Bob Ketterling passed away several years ago. This is his wife, Lois. And Bob, to make a long story short, grew up in the Depression. He always wanted to go to the carnival, but never had much money to do so. He always thought it was a great deal to ride the merry-go-round. He never told his wife, but he always wanted to purchase one. And so in the late 80s, there was a carnival auction in Rapid City, South Dakota. And he went, unbeknownst to his wife, with a buddy, and they bought a carousel, but it was in pieces, laying on the ground, needed to be put together. He brought this back, and it was laying in her yard when she got home. And she was not very happy about the carousel laying in pieces, but he said he would put it together. It would, it wouldn't be there long, and so forth. Well, she laughed and she said, I knew the day that he had it together and working, because she said, I came home from work and there were about 20 cars parked in our front yard. I went around back and there were kids everywhere taking rides on this carousel. Well, she laughed and she said, I thought it was neat. But when everybody left, she said, I told my husband, Bob, this is not staying in the backyard. It's got to go somewhere else. And so Bob worked with the city leaders there, and they built a place across from the county courthouse. And now you can tell they built a gazebo of a sense over this. And Bob began to give rides to kids for free. And so kids could come. And on the day I was there, they said, well, this isn't one of our normal days, but watch what happens. They said, we're going to open this up. We're going to turn on the music. Sure enough, kids began to come. So who do you have in your town? Maybe it's you. What can you do that creates this vibrant community? They can be little things that people already enjoy, and so they want to share that with the community. What happened in Faulkton, though, was that when Bob passed away, they decided to give the town a new motto. They named it the Carousel City. It's even on their water tower. But they also began to have art. They've painted huge murals on the side of the grain elevator and around town. It really inspired the city to say, ooh, we are the Carousel City. What else can we do around, having this carousel? And when you're in Faulkton, South Dakota, you're a long ways from anywhere, but it made that town not only stabilize its citizenry, but helped grow it because they created a vibrant community. Another one that I love is Vernal, Utah. Vernal is a town of about 10,000. It's on the Utah-Colorado border near Dinosaur National Park. If you go to Vernal, Utah, you will find these huge planters of flowers. In fact, walk down a sidewalk, and this is what the sidewalks will look like in the summertime. And this all began from people that said, we love growing flowers. And so it was the local garden club. This started, I think, 20 years ago. We talk about it in the book, and I'd have to go back and look up the exact year. But it started very small, and people thought, that was neat. And then the garden club said, well, what if we helped you sponsor other planters? And so the civic groups in town said, okay, I'll take 10 planters. Our group will do this. The garden club helped them give the seeds and organize it and so forth. And I think at last count, they were up to something. It was thousands of planters, literally thousands of planters, and each civic group taking certain ones. Imagine what your town looks like when it looks like this. It's covered in blossoms. It made it such an attractive town that people want to be. And remember, that's the key. Why do people want to be there? Well, certainly they have to have a place to work, but I could commute to where I need to work. So what really makes me want to live there? Well, it's some of these other amenities. It's a nice place to live. And so Vernal did a really good job of this. Let's take this a step further of what could happen. Osage, Iowa. Osage isn't that far from Mason City, which would be the big city, if you will, in northern Iowa. As you can see, Osage, Iowa, only 3,600 people. They had 7 groups come together, and we detail this more in the book. And we'll get into more of this in our second session. but it's really a good example of how a community came together and brought some civic organizations together and said, we are missing out because we don't have certain amenities. So one of that is some sort of recreation type of complex. Another is a theater, another is a museum. Everybody came together and they said, what's our shared vision of what we can do? Now you're just seeing parts of the pictures here, but remember, this is a town of 3,600 with a lazy river, with a lap pool, with an indoor running track, indoor basketball courts, that theater, a museum. They did all of this. And for the most part, everything that I'm showing you so far in this presentation has not been done with tax dollars. Now in Osage, Iowa, they did do some, but certainly not all. It was the power of bringing these groups together in a shared vision. Think about what that does to a town of 3,600 where people could drive 30 to 40 minutes to Mason City, but I don't have to go anywhere and I can have this here in my hometown. We did an article for Farm Journal magazine that I write for, and one young lady who had literally could probably live anywhere, a skill set, you know, has her master's degree and so forth, but grew up on a farm near Osage, Iowa. She told us, she said, I am in Osage mostly because of this complex, because this could be found anywhere in the nation and we've got it here. And she said, I met a lot of my best friends at this community when young moms came together with their kids and so forth. This was a place that we could gather. This is what made our community strong. And it's because people came together to create that vibrant community. So again, a lot of different examples. It could be all the way from a flower planter all the way up to creating a recreation complex because people came together. But these are things that help create a vibrant community. That leads us to our last area, which is investing in youth. And I think all of us would say, yeah, we certainly want to do that, but we have trouble getting our hands around exactly how we do it. And the other piece I want to give as a caveat to this is this. Don't feel bad if you see young people move away. It doesn't mean your community is bad if people graduate and go somewhere else. In some cases, we need to go somewhere else because perhaps I do that for education and for a job or so forth. The key that I tell people, this hit home to me after a speaking presentation one time where a nice couple came up and they just felt bad because they said, we have 3 kids and all of them left town and we just feel bad they did. And I tried to tell them that isn't bad. I said, the key is to make sure that young people feel like there are opportunities where I could either stay here or I could come back sometime in the future. And that's the key. Have we created a place where people could make a home, feel good about it, create a business? That's the key. So here's the story I share to help get us in the right mindset. Years and years ago, we did a story in Morristown, New Jersey. And Morristown is home to the CNI, where they train CNI dogs. So I was visiting with the head trainer of the CNI, and then we're winding up the interview. And I said, what's the most difficult thing to train a dog to do? And I said, it's not to cross a busy street because how's a dog read the lights? Because the dog's supposed to be colorblind. And he kind of shrugged his shoulders and said, well, difficult. But he said, not the most difficult, because he said, think about this. The dog has eyes. If you give the command to go, the dog can still see a car coming. And so it knows pretty well, don't get in front of that car. So that's instinct. We really don't have to teach instinct. So it made sense. So I said, well, what is the most difficult thing then to train a dog to do? And he has a big window in his office. He looks out the window and he says, well, it's probably that big oak tree out there in the yard. I didn't know what he was talking about. And he could tell that. He said, well, look at that oak tree. He said, about how high off the ground is that lowest limb? And I said, oh, it's probably about 5 feet off the ground. He said, toughest thing is when we put a blind person on that leash, that dog must realize it cannot go underneath that tree anymore. Otherwise, I got a lot of blind people around here with a lot of headaches because that limb's going to hit them 5 feet right in front of the head. And then he went on and he said something that made a lot of sense. He said, you know, when our dogs leave here, they can no longer see the world from 2 feet off the ground. They have to see the world from 5 feet off the ground. Just like working with people, he said, you only see it through your eyes. You're just going to give them a lot of headaches. So I encourage you as you think about this third component about youth is well, how can you see it from somebody else's eyes? And this is the picture of how they train those dogs. They don't necessarily use the tree. They can just use a 2x6 and put it across a couple of step ladders there. But you can tell that dog could go underneath that ladder all day long and never hurt it. But when you put somebody who's blind on that leash, it's going to get them every time. Don't feel bad if this is difficult to do, but do your best to try to somehow get youth involved and see it from their perspective. St. James, Missouri, here's what they did. It's called Firehouse Coffee. They had an abandoned firehouse across from the school. And the city said to the school, hey, we'll give you a free firehouse. And it was a way to get rid of it for them. And the school, maybe it was better for them not to have taken it, but they did. They took it for $1. And the art teacher and counselor, he's there in the back center, he was kind of the ramrod behind this. And they began to create a little coffee house, but it also began to be a place where they could display art. It was also a place where they could have music. And it was a place that the students ran. Certainly there were teachers and adults and parents that helped, but the students began to run this. And they created the inside of this. They did the decorating. You can see in the corner, they kind of a stage back there. And so students could come and play some music. So those that maybe are good with guitar, whatever they do. They have the art on the walls. They also have a place where they have a pool table and so forth. But it became a little hangout after school. And it's only open certain days of the week after school, but people could come there. Now, here's what's even, I think, neater. The students don't receive a salary for working there, but they take shifts, and then the money that they earn, they all vote on how they will give that money to some group in the community or region. So in other words, they get work experience, which is great. They can put that on a resume, but they've learned the ability to have community service and be able to take something to help others, which is really cool. And they did it with an abandoned building. It was a really neat way to involve school, youth, and a business in town to help make that connection. Water Valley, Mississippi is one that has even taken this a step further. And this is a video, again, you can see at Total Town Makeover. Water Valley, Mississippi, you know, like a lot of towns, saw a lot of youth leaving, and they went back to that economic vitality question. What is it that people are leaving for someplace else? And they found that there were businesses in their region that really needed people with a skill set, not only in computer science, but really in web and app creation, being able to do social media, these types of things. And as you'll see in the video, if you go there to watch, there were a couple of young men that had actually moved into town from somewhere else. It's important to note they were attracted because of the community, about specifically one drugstore and a soda fountain that really impressed them, the small town life. And so they made this their home, not too far outside of Oxford, Mississippi, where the University of Mississippi is. And they had a background in computer science. And so they said, you know, we could train students to do this, and they wouldn't have to go to college for a 4-year degree. If we began to teach this, probably a year would do it. And so as the video explains, they began to go to businesses and they began to put together a program, and the businesses helped fund the training program. And so they could offer this to students for free. Now, I believe there are 20 in a class. This is one of the classes, and I don't think there's quite 20 in that picture, but I believe that's about how many it is. Intensive program for a year. The students pay nothing to be in it. They have to be nominated by their schools. And so there's an application process. And they said these are normally students that they might not go to college. They might not be interested in a 4-year career, a 4-year college, but they are interested in a career that perhaps deals something with computers, the media, so forth. These students, when they graduate the program after 1 year, usually go into businesses in the surrounding area, and they are earning at least $50,000 starting salary. So think about that. You've taken a student that's 1 year out of high school, they have no debt, no college debt, and they begin earning a salary of $50,000 a year or more, really where they grew up. Great story about how a community took an abandoned building and began a program that really has impacted their area. And they've been written about in a lot of different magazines and so forth as well. I think that ultimately the idea of what can happen then, and this is why I mentioned it's not wrong to try to lure businesses, but there's an untapped potential of what businesses you already have. Troy Bancroft grew up in St. John's, Michigan, in that area. And it was really his father-in-law that started a fertilizer business, especially fertilizer business. And then Troy came along when the thing was just beginning. And they've grown that into agri-liquid fertilizers, which if you're in the ag community, you've probably heard of this company that reaches literally nationally now. This is their new headquarters. And their new headquarters they built in St. John's, Michigan. Actually, it's in rural St. John's, Michigan, so it's not in town. When it was built, it was at the corner of 2 gravel roads. Now they've since paved them, but they built at the corner of 2 gravel roads. And when I interviewed Troy, he talked about it and said, we could have put this headquarters in a sense anywhere, but this is the community where we grew up. This is where we want to be. The headquarters has about 50 or 60 people who work there. And when you look in the background, you say, wow, that's a big building for 50 or 60 people. And it is. And that's because here's the neat part of the story. And this is what happens, I think, when businesses grow up in the town where the kids, if you will, grew up. He built his own agricultural discovery museum. And so part of that building was a place where kids could come and study the story of agriculture. He had 7 conference rooms built there for the employees of AgroLiquid. He rents those out for free. They have state-of-the-art technology, and the only stipulation is just sign up ahead of time. We'll reserve the room for you, and you can use it free of charge. They've held prom there. They've held all kinds of things there. In fact, he laughed one of the days that we did an interview. He said, yeah, last week I came to work and I needed to meet with our senior staff. We went downstairs and we had no meeting rooms. We'd rented them all out. He said, we met in the kitchen, but he said it didn't matter to me because that was the goal, is that not only have we employed people here, but this is where we grew up. This is where we built our headquarters, and now we can give back to the community. I know it's tempting for us to say, well, that's a wonderful story, but that took like 30 years to play out. And I agree. And so that's why you have to do some things simultaneously. You have to begin by perhaps having flower planters in Vernal, Utah. You begin with little things, but that doesn't mean that you can't be doing other things at the same time. And maybe it's something like Water Valley was doing to inspire entrepreneurship, things like this to help begin to grow these businesses. You can do different things at different times with different time frames. Something could happen in 6 months, and there could be a 10-year plan, or in this case, it was a 30-year plan, if you will. But that's all right. I go back to Franklin Roosevelt. Do something. And if it doesn't work, try something else, but do something, and perhaps do something in little bits to show progress. And again, in our second section, we'll talk about next week the importance of doing that. Let me wind up with this. Ron Drake is a name that some of you may know. He wrote a book called Flip This Town, and you'll find his interview. We did a podcast with him on our website. And Ron is really into revitalizing buildings. He has a construction background, and so he's worked on these buildings in the past. And so a great book if you're looking at revitalizing an actual building. He really gets in the nuts and bolts of it. And so I asked him, sorry about that, we had something fall off the walls here. I asked him, I said, what's the most difficult thing for a small town to do? What's the biggest challenge? And he said, that's easy. He said, it's you. And he said, I don't mean you individually, but he said, it's you in the sense of those that live there. Because he said, there's 2 things or 2 types of people in that town. He said, there are people who are older, who grew up there, who remember what the town once was. And they believe it can never be that again because they saw it slowly fade away. And then you've got a younger class of people who never saw what the town once was, but only heard the stories. And they believe that those turnarounds only take place in other bigger towns, somewhere different than where they live. The biggest problem, he said, is you. It's believing that you can do it. And so that's why doing little things to begin to make those things happen are so important. So we've covered a lot of ground. I've mentioned the website there, the totaltownmakeover.com. We have a lot of those videos parked there, as well as some of the podcasts. The podcast I do is called Farming the Countryside, which is usually production ag focused, but at times we talk about small town issues because that affects, of course, those in agriculture. And so we've pulled out selected podcasts, one of which is with Ron Drake, and there's some others there that you might enjoy listening to give you some ideas on a makeover. And we'll be taking questions here, but you can see my name, my website, my email there, and I'll flash up one more slide that has more information there. So American Countryside's our daily broadcast. If you go to AmericanCountryside.com, you can find it. I think we're on something like 25 stations in Missouri, but you can follow it on Facebook as well. And we post there and have more stories, and you can connect with us on the different websites as well. Caitlin, I know that we've had some questions come in, and so you may want to field those or share them my way, but we have some time here, and so I'll be glad to answer questions as best I can. yeah, if we want to go to that now, we'll go ahead and do that.
Great. The first one we have is how can they get your book? What's the best way to purchase your book?
Sure. You know, one easy way would be to go to totaltownmakeover.com. There's a link right on there that says something about purchase the book. And so it has that book as well as others that I've written, but Total Town Makeover is the one that's on this topic, and it has the resources there as well. So that's the easiest place to do it. You can find it on Amazon and so forth, but Total Town Makeover takes you right there. And I should mention this. Sometimes I'll have people get the book, and that's great, and I'm appreciative. Sometimes people say, hey, I'd like to get these for, you know, I'm on a board, or I want to get these for the city council or whatever. Glad to do that. But if you need multiple copies, please email me, because I don't have an option on there to buy, you know, like 10 copies or more, and we'll get you them cheaper. Really, my goal is, hey, if I cover my costs of printing and shipping, that's great. But if we can get them out to you, you don't need to, you know, buy 20 at retail. We can do something. So email me before you do that. I'd be glad to.
As we wait for some more questions, we have a little bit of time left. So any questions that you guys have, feel free to submit those either in the chat feature or that Q&A feature. I will remind people that this is a 2-part series. So this was part 1. Part 2 will take place a week from today, same time, 10 a.m. on Thursday, January 28th. And Andrew will be back. Do you want to give us a little bit of a preview as to what we'll be talking about next week?
Sure. So
probably the topic that most people need to hear about.
Well, hey, there's 2 things that we're really going to focus on next week. One is the situation of leadership and making these things happen. I suspect that everybody on this call is probably on here because you have a role in making this happen, and you have. And that can be exhilarating and it can be frustrating as well. So I'm going to give you some ideas on ways that I've seen, I think, towns pull together people and hopefully do this successfully. It's tough. It is tough. I acknowledge that because I've been part of it, and it can be very frustrating at times. And then secondly is the funding part. And I'm going to tell you now, don't come with the expectation of, oh, voila, there's the secret. I wish we'd have found that earlier. But I will give you some ideas of things that I've seen communities do. And perhaps they're unique ideas of, oh, I hadn't thought about that. Yeah, certainly we can all write grants, and grants are part of it. But how could you inspire this to begin to happen within the community itself? And so we're going to talk about that too. And again, we'll show some videos. I'll try to show real life examples in all of this. Now, let's see. I now have my screen up here so I can see this. You were talking to less than 300 people, and if you do, what do you feel their biggest setback is? I intentionally in these presentations share examples from really small places, because my idea is if you look at it and say, wow, there you have 300 people. Well, if they can do it, then anybody can do it. And that's the idea. So even if you're listening to this and you're in a town of 25,000, 50,000, I think that you can do it. You just tackle it a little different way. But I like to start really small so nobody can say, oh, well, you know, he only had towns from 10,000 or more. So good luck. We're in trouble. So the towns that are really little, we have a video that's going up, and it should be up next week. And if you go to the Facebook page, American Countryside, I think it's on there. It's from Allerton, Iowa, which is just across the border. Allerton is in that 300 range. Maybe it's 400. There's not much in Allerton. And the couple that we interviewed said, we just put out the word, we're going to meet at the gazebo at this time, and we're going to talk. And that's what they did. They met at the gazebo. And it was the little drugstore that was going to sell, and they pooled their money together and they bought the drugstore, and then they began to use that as a way to revitalize. I've seen that with several really small towns. So this 300 and less type of thing. Another one in South Dakota, we write about it in the book, is they have the International Vinegar Museum. They don't produce vinegar. There's nothing about vinegar in that town. It was just a guy in town that liked to cook with vinegar. And he just said, nobody else has one. They have the vinegar parade, the vinegar queen. He said, we've had people move here because of vinegar. And they're a town of 150. So I would say, get together. Is there something you all like that maybe you have a shared interest? And it's just, and if you have the shared interest, then it's easier to begin to say, oh, wow, we could do that. We could have fun with this. And don't get too down if people say, nobody cares about that. Everybody's like that. My part of my life is going to towns and doing interviews in places where people say, oh yeah, I don't know why people care about that. I mean, St. Joe is one of my bigger towns close to me. I never gone seen the Pony Express tables till I was out of high school. And people will travel from Europe to see that. You can't be saying, nobody cares. Yeah. Let's see, is there any organizations that would be a great resource asset for a community to find help with planning that can help them get started? So a couple of things that I would share with you. I'm actually on the board of the Community Foundation in Northwest Missouri. Missouri is blessed to have some great community foundations, and their job is to help inspire philanthropy within communities. Community Foundation of the Ozarks is outstanding. I've worked with them, but you've got the one of Greater Kansas City and Mid-Missouri and so forth. If you have trouble connecting with any of them, let me know and I can help you. But their job is to help make some of those things happen. So that would be a great place to start. They often have really good resources, and they may have some people they can connect you with that might even come to your community, and help you that way. I would encourage you to take a look at the Total Town Makeover website. If you're just looking for some resources, Ron Drake, his book, Flip This Town, there's another one on there, 13 Ways to Kill Your Community. That's another book and an author. And so those are just some great ways that if you just want to get some reading and some background, those will help you as well. So those are some things that I think of from off the top of my head. How much marketing do the communities do to tell the story, or do people find the town's businesses on their own? Yeah, it has been a variety. This is one example, and I will get more into it next week, where I think it's a great way to have young people involved. My son is in 7th grade, and this past week he said, Dad, I created an app for your radio program. I have no idea how to do that. Now, we may need to do a little work on it, but he loves coding and stuff. You've got those students in your high school and in your community, and that could be a great way to involve them. We created a video for our town. We started a foundation. We'll get into more of it next week. And we had some young people that in the high school that could do this. They brought their drone and they shot it. I wrote the script because I'm used to writing scripts, and I'd be happy to share the script with anybody, and you could use it as a model and just kind of fill in the blanks. But they put together the video and they did the social media. So that's a great place where you could use young people. And so I would say, yeah, these communities probably do something. They normally just look for what free stuff they can do. And sometimes it becomes viral. Sometimes it doesn't as much, but you'll be amazed. Even a little outreach will help. And if you feel like, I don't know much about that, ask a younger person and they probably will. And they can do it so easy. It's not a big deal. So they should be able to make it happen. Caitlin, there's a question there about posting online. This Facebook, I know we're live, but that will be posted there. Is that right?
Yes. So the both part 1 and part 2 will be live on our Facebook page. So we're currently live on Facebook right now, and that will archive the video on our Facebook page, which is Missouri Humanities Council. And that'll be up there in perpetuity. We will also upload it to our YouTube channel, which is also Missouri Humanities Council. So that those will be up for if you want to share. If you think, wow, this is really great, but I know that more people in my community would love to see this, feel free to share on your Facebook pages, on your websites, etc. So you have both a Facebook link basically and a YouTube link. The YouTube link, give me a couple days on that one, but that'll be for part 1 and part 2. And then it looks like, Andrew, we've got one more in the chat, and then I do have some in the Q&A feature as well that we can.
Okay. Yeah. So if you partner with any regional planning commissions on projects. So I tell people I'm always glad to help. Part of what I do is go out and speak to groups. That's where I started 25 years ago as a state and national FFA officer. So I tell people in some ways I just never quit speaking, although today it's more with adult groups, although I still do some stuff with youth. Yes, I'm always glad to try to help and so forth. What I do tell people is usually my connection with communities is more of this, to give overviews, to give ideas, and to share what happens. The nuts and bolts part, because I'm doing other things and on the broadcast side and farming, is hard for me to spend lots of time with any one community, but I know some folks that are great at it. And so I'm more than happy to be a part of it and help set the stage and help people begin to think. And then I know some folks that would be more than happy. And those community foundations are a great resource. In some cases, they charge little to nothing to help with that, process. And so we'll get into more of that next time. But again, those could be great resources. So email me and I'll be glad to try to do what I can. So yeah, let's see, Q&A.
Do you have that feature? Can you see those?
Yes, I just opened it up here. So yeah, can you focus on the neighborhood and have the same success? What do you recommend? Yes, definitely. So one of the things we talk about in the book is one of the opening towns that I talk about is basically in New York City. And it's just a neighborhood. And I think that works really well. So in a sense, a neighborhood's like a small town. And so those neighborhoods make that happen. And it was kind of the neighborhood of Sleepy Hollow in New York and what they did. And so we talk about that. So definitely, there's some differences, but yes, neighborhoods certainly work. Let's see, I read the book last week and I appreciate that. So let's see, how can we coordinate the rollout of broadband in Missouri into these great concepts? I agree. I'm wholeheartedly behind it. I don't know how to make it happen. Yeah, that's big. And let's face it, and I had this discussion, we were filming a video last week. Broadband literally makes it so most people can work anywhere on the planet. And some communities have been able to get the fiber there. I don't have good answers, but making that happen is really important. So I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but literally, once you get the fiber there, it creates so many opportunities. So let's see about the Main Street. Have you seen towns do with the Main Street program? Albany's accepted into that. Had a slow start due to COVID. Main Street's a great program, and I know communities that have done some with Main Street. I'm not intimately involved in knowing the nuts and bolts, but believe it's a great program. Ron Drake, who we did the interview with, has done a lot with Main Street. So I think it's a great program. Don't have any necessarily details to give you other than saying, yeah, that's a great way to start. And so for those of you that have done that, I think it's really good to do that. What's the best way to, go ahead.
Sorry, I can add to that real quick. So I'm quite well incommunicado with Main Street programs. I've done a few programs with them in the past. So if anybody wants some contacts, I have contacts in individual Main Streets. I also know the actual Missouri Main Street program, the headquarter program. I've got a good relationship with them as well. So I'd be happy to pass along any information. I've seen great examples of what a Main Street community can accomplish with the help from the Main Street program. So highly recommend getting involved if at all possible. So, and congrats on being a Main Street program, Albany. That's great.
Great. What's the best way to approach businesses to get them to support a specific community program? Again, we'll get into more of this next week. Often your community. And so sometimes it's getting some like-minded business owners together. It's kind of like Allerton, Iowa saying, meet at the gazebo at 5 p.m. Pull 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people together, community business people, and say, okay, what are you seeing? What do we need to do? That's a little of what happened in our community, where a couple of business owners began to say that. And sometimes you'll find a shared cause and say, okay, we could work together on this. Or those business owners then can go to the larger community and say, okay, how could we make this happen together? I think it's a good idea, and we're going to get more into that next week. So I guess I'm giving you a tease to come back next week, but there are some specific things you can do, and it's a great idea to do it, is what I would say. Let's see, live in a small town of 3,000, start a community betterment group. Great. That's a great way to start. We'll get into that next week. Caitlin will know more about the people on the call today.
Yes, we had, it looks like we had 89 people with us today. That's great numbers. Thank you all for joining us.
And then about the planners there, and I think asking for any ideas. I don't know specifically. I just am familiar with some towns that have done them, and I don't know about some of the rules regarding the state highways and so forth. So I don't know that can be much help. I'm not the expert on it, but maybe somebody out there is and can connect, or I don't know if anybody can type an answer or share an answer, but Yeah, it's great that you're doing it. A lot of people don't even get that far. So. All right.
Looks like we are right at about 11 o'clock. Looks like we got through all of our questions, which is a great accomplishment. Thank you for powering through those, Andrew. And thank you for asking them. Those were a lot of really great questions. So I'm going to wrap up here. Thank you so much, Andrew, again, for a wonderful, insightful presentation. We had Liz that commented saying that she feels inspired, which is the whole goal. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. I'm really excited to see what else we have to share next week. Be sure to come back on Thursday, January 28th, same time, same place, 10 a.m. And Andrew will be back to take a closer look at those funding opportunities, bringing local organizations together for shared planning. Lots of really good stuff to try and get you guys going on some great things for your communities. I will send out a reminder email next week for part 2. If you know that there are people that would have loved this presentation and want to join us next week, let them know where they can watch part 1 and then have them join us for part 2. All that information is on our website, mohumanities.org/TTM, or on our Facebook page, Missouri Humanities. Thank you, everyone, again for tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you all back for more. Andrew, we'll see you next week.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.